Some voice concerns as to the debt levels reached, while the nature of those debts has not been scrutinized. In the old days, we used to borrow money to eat. That was funding consumption. However, when one looks at current borrowing, one must understand that it is currently funding production. That means creating value, thus sustainability. This is also true in the resources consumed. In the old days, countries used to export raw material. A country can consume a resource until it perishes. Remember the days when there was a reliance on traditional fossil fuels. The examples are many. Others would come up with sustainable development plans and benefit from the many gifts that nature has bestowed on them. Creating value has become the key word. Good evening. You're watching the Business Insider on Nile TV International, and I'm Ayman Salah. Our weekly program tackles events affecting our economy and the business environment as a whole, and we aim to bring you the inside story. Welcome back. We start with our first news item for the week, and it goes, a mobile app was launched by the Ministry of Petroleum and Mineral Resources to identify the location of natural gas stations. This is part of the country's efforts to ease the transition towards expanding the usage of clean energy. On Monday, the Minister of Petroleum, Tariq Al-Mullah, underlined the urgency to adhere to the timeline set to construct natural gas supply stations on vital roads in order to serve the largest number of citizens. You can download the app, which appears, I believe the app appears on the screen. It will appear on the screen in a moment. Yes, and it goes play.google.com/store/app/details ?ID equals info.egyptgas.mop. That's the app that you can download to know where your nearest gas station is. The second news item is from the Ministry of Petroleum as well. It goes, the first digital international 2021 oil exploration bid was launched by the Egyptian General Petroleum Corporation and the Egyptian Natural Gas Holding Company. They have invited specialized companies in oil and gas exploration and exploitation to participate in this round, which covers 24 exploration blocks in the Gulf of Suez, the Western Desert, and the Mediterranean Sea. The EUG, or Egypt's Upstream Gateway, is Egypt's fully integrated digital platform offering virtual access to all 2021 bid data, including information and coordinates of the offered blocks on an interactive map, data room viewing, seismic surveys, subsurface insights, data packages, and the procedures, terms and conditions, and the model agreement, which are all available online. I believe you can also see that. It's written on the screen, and it goes eug.petroleum.gov.eg. These are the two main news items we have for you this week, and we will be discussing the importance of this news with our guest who joins us tonight. I will be joined by Hussein Ghazzawi, an energy expert, a CEO of leading companies from the oil sector, international oil companies previously, and he's an expert on the subject, and we'll be hosting him here on the program. So stay with the Business Insider. Welcome back. You're watching the Business Insider. I'm Ayman Salah. Tonight I am joined by Dr. Hussein Ghazzawi. He's an energy expert. A pleasure to have you on the show tonight. We're talking about sustainability. We're talking about securing our energy for the future. Let's watch this report and then start our discussion.
Sustainability is a key component in any development plans. In the energy sector, many international companies are shifting from the traditional fossil fuels to cleaner energy, and their R&D is geared towards this end. This applies to countries seeking to secure a better future for generations to come, especially in light of the challenges of the scarcity of resources. Minister of Petroleum and Mineral Resources Tariq Al-Mullah has asserted that Egypt aims to rely on 42% of renewable energy in its energy mix by 2030. This date is the date that Egypt's vision revolves around. Al-Mullah said that the diversification relies on the implementation of a number of solar and wind energy projects. During his virtual participation in the 5th International Energy Forum of the European Union, the Energy and Climate Day to promote a safe and sustainable future for clean energy, Al-Mullah stated that Egypt succeeded within a few years in doubling the rate of natural gas delivery to households. More than 12 million residential units currently enjoy this commodity, with more expansions in the pipeline, in addition to the expansion of natural gas car conversions. Egypt is also engaged in huge international and regional partnerships to achieve a safe, clean energy future. Al-Mullah highlighted the East Mediterranean Gas Forum as it is the most important regional initiative in the field of energy, with neighboring countries seeking to establish a robust and interconnected energy infrastructure in the Middle East to maximize the natural gas reserves and resources in the region. This is in line with the United Nations 2030 strategy and the terms of the Paris Agreement, aiming to achieve environmental targets such as reducing greenhouse emissions by 2050. There are a number of pivotal energy partnerships with the European Union, as well as cooperation with the EU, Germany and Belgium to develop a strategy for hydrogen use to export to Europe.
Welcome back. Tonight I'm joined by Dr. Hussein Ghazzawi, energy expert. A pleasure to have you on the show once again.
Thank you for having me.
You heard the report. You also heard the two news items that we've selected for this week. One of them was the current digital bid that was launched. What's your take on that?
I think it's very important for Egypt. The discovery of oil in Egypt took place over 100 years ago. That Egypt upstream gateway have the wealth of all this information for the last 100 years, all the seismic data, the well data, the well log. And it's part also of the digital transformation of Egypt. It's not only Egypt, it's the entire world, and the head of state is focusing on the digitalization, so that, and also help with the Egypt bid round. We know about the bid round with this 24 blocks, as you mentioned early in the news, starting from Gulf of Suez, Eastern Desert, and Western Desert, and Mediterranean. It gives also the transparency. All this international company, there are major oil company already signed to be part of the Egypt upstream gateway. It has a different level based on the fees you are paying. You can have access to data, and it's a live platform. Any new data capture are updated.
Right. Let me interrupt you here.
Please.
In the old days, it used to be a bid by printing a hefty amount of paper and selling this document to international bidders or local bidders, and then you start the bidding process.
Correct.
Now it has been transformed into a digital platform, which is the fruit of cooperation between the Ministry of Petroleum and international companies,
Correct.
I believe.
Correct.
And now all of this you can find online.
You can find online. the access level will it's defined. It's so as
Access level as to the information, the amount of
access level
information?
to the amount of the information, to the detail of the information, each concession. So as much more information as you want, there is a fees to.
You pay more.
You pay more, of course. And as I was saying, it gives a transparency to the system. And Egypt has been successful in the last 4 years when it comes to the bid round. We have managed to attract the major oil companies, whether American, European, and regional oil companies, to come to bid in Egypt, compared to other countries, nearby countries with a similar situation. We managed to attract more. Talking also about the Red Sea, the maritime demarcation between Egypt and Saudi Arabia allowed us to start exploring for oil and gas in the Red Sea. Seismic data acquisition already took place. Major oil company took a concession in the Red Sea with the regional companies, so Mediterranean as well. So
when you're talking Red Sea, you pointed that this followed the demarcation of borders between Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Also, when you're talking about the Mediterranean, you're not talking about East Mediterranean alone. You're talking East and West Mediterranean.
Of course, East and West Mediterranean. And also, if it wasn't for the maritime demarcation between Egypt and Cyprus, we wouldn't have explored in Zohr and have the giant discovery of Zohr in August 2015. And now with the West, we have the demarcation with maritime demarcation with Greece. So it allows us to explore all our resources. And back to the Egypt upstream gateway, I think it will even support our position, give more transparency, and the data is wealth. It's very important to digitalize this data and keep it, and it's continuous, updated, whatever new information is gathered from these concessions.
And analyzed.
Of course.
And analyzed.
And technology is evolving. Seismic data 20 years ago, you get that much. Even now with the same data, with, like you mentioned, analyzing, reprocessing of this data, it's a continuous improvement. So having all this old data will help us in the future to explore more of our resources.
I'm quite confused a little bit, because from what one reads, the world is suffering from economic drawbacks due to the pandemic, due to the slowdown, and so on and so forth. But then when I read, I find that 2020 was an exceptional year in Egypt for upstream activities. What does this signal? What does it entail when the whole world is suffering from a slowdown, and here in Egypt you're attracting investors in oil and gas, and you have an exceptional year?
Thank you for that question. Egypt is the only country in the region with a positive growth in the gross GDP, gross domestic product, even with the pandemic. So that's a fact. I think Egypt, with the economic reform and managing to attract investors, I always say that investors, they don't have heart. They want to come and make money. Having the environment for them to ease, Egypt has actually went up in many index when it comes to transparency, ease to do business. I admire the head of state making personal follow-up, meeting all this major executive from companies, urging and encouraging them to come to invest in Egypt. So I think, back to your comment that you being confused, I think Egypt actually, I read that we are among top 10 countries managed to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic and managed actually to maintain the growth, achieving
mitigated
and mitigating the mitigation. We cannot ignore the mitigation, and I think hats off to all Egyptian citizens, despite the pandemic, despite the economic pressures, they managed as much as they could to mitigate the situation.
All right, so what would you say are the main highlights, the main agreements that and discoveries that took place in 2020, their magnitudes and effects?
I think not only the discoveries, of course there were some discoveries, some gas discovery, Rashouch in July of 2020, gas discovery in Mediterranean. It has the proximity to existing infrastructure. So I think the Mediterranean and the Mediterranean basin, for us in Egypt, I think there is a lot of new news, good news we'll see in the future, but also on
near future.
Near future, I think every year the U.S. Geological Institute upgrading the reserve in place for the Mediterranean basin. There is a lot of discovery in Egypt, in the East Mediterranean. Lebanon had a dry wells for their exploration, but I'm sure the next wells will have a good news. You cannot have oil and gas from just drilling the first well. So that's as far as upstream concerned. Of course, we continue having discoveries in the oil in the Western Desert with some discoveries, and now the Gulf of Suez. Also in the downstream, the opening of the Egypt refinery company, upgrading Egypt refinery capacity. And if you allow me, I would like to use what you have said in your intro, is a value added. It's very important, and I would like to use the example of barrels of oil now is about $60, and I'm talking about a real example. Nigeria probably exporting oil to Belgium, and I mentioned Belgium because they have a surplus refining product capacity. For $60, they get it back the following day 5 to 6 times more. We talk about $300 to $320 of refined product. The value added is very important. All this refinery, Egypt having a refinery capacity now of 650,000 barrels per day, going to full self-satisfactory of all the refinery product by 2023. Actually, talking about our friend in Nigeria, they will have the biggest refinery project open by the end of 2021 in near Lagos, with a capacity of about 600,000 barrels per day. So Egypt, Nigeria, I think the entire continent, the entire world, talking about our raw material. We now this project with the Ministry of Petroleum and Mineral Resources in Abu Tartur, having our phosphate, and instead of just exporting the phosphate as a raw material, no, you are producing a phosphoric acid. There is a $1 billion mega project for the value added, produce the phosphoric acid from the phosphate back again to
you have the black sand, you have
of course the quartz, you have the gold. The last 2 weeks ago, Egypt signed more than 10 agreements for gold to explore for gold in the eastern desert, with the new mining law, which allow more investors. You have Canadian, you have British, you have Australian, major mining company.
And the largest company worldwide,
of course,
entered.
And local investor as well, with presence elsewhere. So there is a lot of good news happening, and a lot of regulation helped Egypt to achieve that.
I was going to ask you, what attracts international oil companies or international mining companies to come to Egypt at this stage?
So if you remember, by 2013, the payment dues to the foreign oil company reached $6.3 billion.
Right.
June last year, we managed to drop this number by 850. So we have regained our credibility with this major oil company. We have changed the regulation. Also, the gas there is law in 2017. Now, private sector can import and trade gas. If you are talking about Egypt going to be the hub, and we are the hub of the gas and energy in the East Mediterranean and North Africa, you need to have new regulation, new laws to allow us basically to be in this position.
One of, one can say, points of strengths of this country, would you say, has always been paying its dues? Meaning, at the time of harshest economic conditions, at the time of harshest political developments and transformation, the country never reneged on its financial obligations.
That's true.
And when we're talking about the arrears due to the international oil companies, you mentioned 6.3 billion US dollars, this has been diminished to around
850 last June.
850 million.
850 million last year.
That's down 86%.
Correct.
This in itself, the credibility when you enter into an agreement and you fulfill, does that secure the international investor?
Of course. Of course. I think credibility is very important, and despite, as you mentioned, the tough time we have been through, the unrest, Egypt never failed in paying its dues, and it demonstrated definitely our credibility. But in addition to that, I think the changing of the environment, creating this...
And the legislative setup.
Of course, and also the investors, there is no issue of transferring their gains outside Egypt. There is the currency risk, which exists in a lot of African countries. For example, after the floating of the Egyptian pound in 2016, you don't have that currency risk now. So that's a big component of any investor coming, the currency risk, the risk of sending back their basically gain outside the countries.
Securing your energy needs for the future means not only relying on the traditional mix, if you will, of energy needs, but also on clean energy and renewable energy. How do you see the current mix, and what are the challenges facing the sustainability formula, if you will, for the next 9 years to 2030?
If you allow me, I think Egypt have done an outstanding job when it comes to the electricity generation. I mean, in 2014, we all remember the blackouts. We all remember when we didn't have the capacity needed. Egypt actually produces now 58 gigawatts, while our probably needs varies depending on the peak, reach probably sometime 28 to 30 gigawatts. So we have
30 is the peak.
30 is the peak.
So you have a surplus of 20 some.
Of course.
Gigawatts.
And the diversification happen, and also changing all this power station to operate with gas. We saved over $2 billion by changing from diesel to gas. Less carbon, natural gas, of course. Less carbon emission. We all very proud of Bimban solar energy station, 1.6 gigawatt and going to 2 gigawatt out of 32 right now to 40 station, and actually got the award in 2019 of the World Bank Prize, being a unique project. When we travel to Hurghada, we see all the wind farm in Jabal al-Zayt, in Za'farana, wind farm Zayt. The nuclear in Dab'a, that's part of Egypt diversification toward energy. We heard in the report that the renewable will reach 42% by year 2030. The technology have evolved. The solar energy now are very competitive with the fossil fuel. Even sometimes it's cheaper, and Egypt is gifted with good weather. We have the sun to allow us for all this solar station. I think something we also not as active as we should, the biogas from the animal remaining.
Garbage and animal remaining.
We need to focus on that. Part of it is environmental. So back to your original question, I'm confident of the sustainability of the energy mix for Egypt for years to come. When it comes to the fossil fuel, we much less dependent on oil. Now it's all natural gas for our electricity, the solar, the wind, the nuclear. It was even some ideas about the coal, and people coal now with it's environmentally friendly to use coal. Coal is still 40% of the electricity produced worldwide from coal. It's going down, but
coal not in the old-fashioned.
No, not on the old-fashioned, of course. No,
right.
not on the
coal
old-fashioned.
With the new technologies
of course,
and the environmental requirements to handle coal energy production from coal. Now,
and the green hydrogen as well. I mean, you produce it now from the solar. You have excessive solar power, so you can have another source of energy. And Egypt, the head of state met with this Belgian companies 4 weeks ago, talking about this. So we are knocking many doors when it comes to, and I think diversification is way to go when it comes to the Egypt energy mix. Natural gas remain a main component of that, followed by the solar and the wind.
I remember having the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Georgieva. At the time, she was the managing director of the World Bank, and she sang praises for the programs that Egypt was executing in cooperation with the World Bank. And actually, she was saying, we are ready to fund more when it comes to Egypt. Having said that, when one looks at a country like Germany, for example, and sees that it produces 20% of its energy needs from solar energy, Germany, solar, quite astonishing. One would say the amount of energy produced by the sun in Germany is nowhere near the amount of energy produced by the sun here in Egypt. Yet, we are talking about producing 42% of our energy needs, renewable energy, by 2030. Should we be more ambitious?
42 is good ambitious. We're standing at 20% now. Doubling that in 10 years, I think will be a good target to aim for. Germany have started that definitely when it comes to intensity of sun. We are far ahead of Germany. But just to complicate what you have said earlier, Africa produced something like 6 gigawatt out of solar energy. It's nothing compared to the worldwide. There is a lot of project going on. We talk about Egypt, we spoke about Morocco as well, South Africa, Kenya and East Africa. So it is happening, but when we spoke about the surplus capacity for electricity in Egypt, we cannot easily export this electricity to neighbor countries like Sudan or Libya or the rest of Africa who in dire need of electricity because of the infrastructure. And I remember His Excellency the President mentioned for Africa, infrastructure is key. The loss of electricity worldwide is less than 10% in the network, in the grid is less than 10%. In Africa, we're talking about above 16%. So infrastructure is very important in, I think, when you mention about the energy security.
You're talking about transmission and transportation
Correct.
of energy.
No, transmission of energy, yes.
Transmission of energy.
Yes.
And here you're talking cooperation between the Ministry of Energy and the Ministry of Electricity and the Ministry of Petroleum.
Correct.
Right? So there's definitely, I know that with the Ministry of Electricity, there's a project to change the transmission grids that are in the country.
It's ongoing. It's upgrading. It's almost double the network, the grid for Egypt. For us in Egypt, I think we're doing very well to allow us to export more.
Right.
You're exporting now 70 megawatt to Sudan, where you can export up to 300 megawatt. You export to Libya about 250. There is now planned potential with Jordan, and from Jordan to Iraq, we have to benefit. Talking being an energy hub and have this surplus electricity coming from the power station, coming from the solar, and back to your comment, reaching 40% of the renewable. There is talk about having a cable under the sea to export to Europe. We have this capacity. We have the sun, we have the wind, we have the natural resources with the gas, where we can maintain our surplus when it comes to energy and electricity and export. But the issue, exporting to Africa, for example, because of the lack of infrastructure, not on our side, in the African country, they are working on it, work in progress.
To maintain and sustain your position as an energy hub, to achieve, to maintain, and to sustain your position as an energy hub equals, what do we need?
Continuous investment, that's very important. We don't want to see what happened in Egypt when we stop exploring after the unrest. We went from exporting gas to import gas. In 2016, we were among the top 5 countries when it comes to importing gas. We reached self-sufficient again in 2018. So continuous investment, research, digitalization, what we have done with the Egypt gateway, transparency. Investors need to come, they need the transparency. There is a list of things we are achieving to be the energy hub, but with all this reason, I think we need to maintain, to continue with our investment and the sustainability of our investment in this domain.
Turning cars into natural gas-powered cars, achievable, sustainable?
Of course, achievable and sustainable. You mentioned in your news, unprecedented number of natural gas stations, 325. If I'm not mistaken, we reach 600 stations. Let's not talk only about natural gas, electricity. Egypt will produce by the end of the year electrical car. So it's all going for less carbon emissions. So yeah, we are on the right track, I believe.
Dr. Hussein Ghazzawi, energy expert. Pleasure having you on the show tonight. You mentioned the carbon emissions, carbon footprint would probably be a subject that we need to discuss and understand more about this issue and its effect on the environment and the economic effects and benefits that a country can gain from carbon emissions or less carbon emissions. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot for having me. I appreciate it.
On the show. Thank you for joining us. See you again, same time next week on the Business Insider. I'm Ayman Salah. Goodbye.